When you think about things from millennia ago, what are the first to come to mind when you think of ancient cultures? Well, for me, those would be the Seven Wonders. Today, only one of these magnificent structures still stands, which is the Great Pyramid at Giza, but the rest were unfortunately not so lucky, being victims of earthquakes, fires, and invading armies. Or so they want you to believe. I mean, think about it. When you look at a building such as the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, that seemed to be too massive to fall in an earthquake. Did I mention that we live in a world that's full of giant beasts that the Japanese call Kaiju, and they've been around for millennia? Well, actually more than that. Millions of years before mankind evolved from apes. Oh yes, that's how old they are. And the Greeks and Mesopotamians did have a heck of a lot of myths and legends about monsters. So it got me thinking, what if they were responsible for the collapse of the Six Wonders, leaving only one? I should introduce myself first of all. My name is Harrison Jones. I'm a citizen of the UK, but my parents were of USA heritage, in case you notice my accent changing now and then. However, I'm currently in Cairo, as I'll be heading towards the Giza Plateau to study the pyramids and Great Sphinx in a few days' time. I study titans that I've just talked about as well, and because I'm a scientist who researches giant monsters, I'm known as a kaijutologist. I've been to the ancient sites where these lost wonders once stood, and attempted to understand what really happened to them, and which monsters were responsible for their downfall. So which of these magnificent structures were destroyed by these great beasts? Well, the answers may just blow your mind. Entry number 1. Pharaoh's Lighthouse at Alexandria, December 15th, 2064. Despite currently residing in Cairo at this present time, I've been to Egypt before a few years ago, but last time I was in Alexandria studying the remains of what used to be the Pharaoh's Lighthouse, possibly the only wonder to have a working function, and not just a mighty building that was there to look impressive, but I digress. So when people talk about the destruction of 1356 AD, they will say that it was due to an earthquake that brought the lighthouse down. However, when I examined the remains of the rubble and statues that were removed from the coast of the Mediterranean, I could help but notice that some of those cracks had what appeared to be scratch marks within them. I know that cracks can take all sorts of strange shapes, but these particular ones looked perfectly aligned and not random. The more I looked into the remains, some of those old bricks looked like they had been crushed by something, and this got me thinking, what if the Pharaoh's Lighthouse wasn't destroyed by an earthquake, as the history books claim, but rather this was the result of a kaiju attack? If my hunch is right, then that could only mean that we already have a suspect. You see, throughout Egypt, land of the pharaohs, there is the image of the serpent, and if Egypt had a kaiju, then the only one that would come to mind would be the guardian of the Kingdom of Mu himself. Now, the Kingdom of Mu is, or should I say, was located in the Pacific Ocean and not the Mediterranean Sea, as I realised that. So this had to be another member of the species, maybe the non-hornless variant. I also conclude it to be Mander because back in 1999, when the Kaiju had their minds took over by an alien race called the Kilax, Mander was seen coiling himself around tall structures. He did it to Big Ben in London, and then he later did the same to a Japanese skyscraper. After jumping to that conclusion, I began to picture Mander wrapping himself around the Pharaoh's Lighthouse when he attacked Alexandria. Whether he was once worshipped as a god but eventually betrayed, or it was just out of instinct, I have no idea. Either way, whatever happened, it would appear that it seems that it's most likely that Mander was responsible for the destruction of the Pharaoh's Lighthouse of Alexandria in 1356 AD. Entry number 2. Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, December 16th, 2064. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus was the Greek equivalent to the Great Pyramid at Giza, but unlike the pyramid which made it to the present day, the mausoleum did not, due to a series of earthquakes that had occurred between the 12th and 15th century AD. To me, this long-lost structure seemed too mighty to collapse, even for ancient standards. And after studying the remains of the Pharos Lighthouse, it got me thinking, if there was a kaiju attack in Alexandria, then there must have been one in Halicarnassus as well. And with that thought in mind, I flew over to Turkey and visited the location that once stood. Today there's only rubble and some statues have survived, a few of which I remember seeing at the British Museum in London many years ago. I walked all over the area searching for clues, and just when I was beginning to think that it might have been earthquakes all along, I headed over to a location that doesn't allow access to the public. There was a series of hidden caves buried deep under the earth. I looked down there, and lo and behold, there was more rubble and broken statues from the once mighty mausoleum. Not only that, but the walls of the caves had lines that didn't look natural, but they resembled claw marks. In fact, when I looked around the area again, it looked more like a tunnel that was made by a large animal, rather than a cave that was naturally created, and so my suspicions were revised. Halicarnassus had regular visits from a kaiju, and I think I know which one. Back in 1965, there was a series of earthquakes that hit the island of Japan, but it was later revealed that they were caused by a giant subterranean reptile named Baragon, who was a creature that had survived the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs 65 million years ago by burying underground. Despite the adorable appearance, he was still a menace and was eventually dealt with by a huge humanoid creature that bared a striking resemblance to the Frankenstein monster. Interestingly, during the Great Global Rampage of 1999, it was thought that Baragon arose from underneath the Arch of Triomphe in Paris, until it was realized that it was actually his cousin Gorosaurus. However, in 2015, when he attacked the City of Love, he did it for real. If that's the case, then it's possible that Baragon could have come up from beneath the mausoleum of Halicarnassus and caused it to crumble, and not to mention that some of those statues would have become his toys, as I think I can recall seeing what appeared to be teeth marks within some of them. With all that constant tunneling caused by Baragon, it's no wonder that the mausoleum eventually caved in due to the earth being weakened by the subterranean kaiju in the 15th century AD. Entry number 3. Colossus of Rhodes, December 17th, 2064. The more I begin to piece it all together, the evidence that these wonders of the ancient world, with the exception of the Great Pyramid, were destroyed due to kaiju attacks, it all starts to make sense. We live in a world where monsters exist, so I'm quite surprised that this idea hasn't been picked up by archaeologists yet. Even though earthquakes aren't always caused by kaiju, however, this won't be the first time that there's been an attack, and they don't want you to know right away. Many years ago, back in 1980, when the world was threatened by Calamity Death Star Gorath, there was an incident that had occurred in Antarctica, and the scientists said that it was an earthquake triggered by Gorath's approach to the Earth. However, a few years later, when all the Earth's monsters were rounded up to be studied on Monster Island, originally called Monsterland, they confessed that they were attacked by a giant walrus-like kaiju, which they named Maguma. The kaijuologists, people who research giant monsters, weren't too pleased that they killed him off rather than preserve him, so an expedition was launched in an attempt to find another member of the species, but to no avail, and it was decided that Maguma was the last of his kind, but the search is still going to this day. If there was an incident that involved a kaiju that happened in Antarctica, then how many more times has it occurred throughout history? Anyway, back to me. In 2043, I was wandering around Rhodes Harbour, specifically the location where the Colossus of Rhodes once stood. Since I was a child, the Colossus was the wonder that interested me the most, being the Mediterranean equivalent / ancestor to the Statue of Liberty. The Colossus was built to celebrate the Greeks' victory over the Persians, but unfortunately the bronze statue sadly didn't last that long, unlike the others, and only stood for 55 years, succumbing to a massive earthquake that struck the island of Rhodes in 228 BC. something to which I have always found suspicious even as a kid, because the Colossus seemed like the sort of monument that could survive a natural disaster unless the island received a Kaiju attack. However, this time round, unlike the past structures, no known piece of the Colossus has made it to the present day, as they were all removed from the harbour and taken away into the wilderness never to be seen again. But the trail doesn't stop cold, because I have a colleague who translates Greek and Roman writing into English, and she has collected letters from ancient roads. While most of the citizens from that time would tell you that it was an earthquake, well, the wrath of the sun god Helios, who apparently disliked the statue, talk about being ungrateful, there was actually a witness who documented what really happened, and this is what he had to say. The night started off quiet in the city of Rhodes. I was doing my duties on the harbour dock. I looked out to sea and noticed something off the coast, and it was a sight that I will never forget as long as I shall live. It looked like the statue, but it was alive. It seemed to be staring at me as if I had done something to displease it. The entity dove underwater, but I could still see its spears sticking out from underneath. It then arose from the depths. This great creature looked like something that only Hades himself would summon, with swords sticking out from its devilish face. It advanced onto Helios, toppling him over, and charged towards the city. You could hear buildings crumbling, men shouting, and women and children crying. The beast ripped off the roof of a temple, where it proceeded to devour all those inside, pleading for the gods to forgive them for their sinful ways. And when I saw its mouth drenched with the blood of its victims, it was as if the gods had abandoned us to this demon behemoth. It grinned at me, before howling, and advanced its dominating presence, and took off into the night sky to wreak its wrath upon the world. Morbius the Betrayer. After reading all that, I'm guessing that this Morbius character must have felt that he was responsible for the monster's appearance and blamed himself for the incident, and thus afterwards must have done the unthinkable. As for the Kaiju who made its attack on Rhodes in 228 BC, and was assumedly the one to bring the end of the Colossus, I bet you're all curious on what Morbius was describing, so I'll explain. On the first description, I originally thought it was Godzilla, especially because Morbius mentioned what sounded like spines sticking out of the sea. However, he said that they looked a lot like spears, rather than leaf-shaped. He also said that the creature had swords stuck on each side of its face, and during its rampage, it took off and flew away. I believe that a more accurate term would be glide. Spears on the back, swords from the face, and the ability to glide. I think I know the Kaiju who brought down the Colossus of Rhodes. Some natives referred to this creature as Borodogi, but in 1958, the beast emerged from a lake where it had been hibernating for a millennium, and it was identified as a Varnapode, or Varn for short. Whether or not it was the same member of the species that destroyed the Colossus 2,000 years ago, or that one died and it was another member that awoke in the 50s, I'm not too certain on what the lifespan of a kaiju is, so I'm guessing that it's either thousands or even millions of years. We'll never know, but what I do know that it was Varn who destroyed the Colossus of Rhodes before the time of Christ, and the attack was truly unbelievable. Entry number 4. Hanging Gardens of Babylon, December 18th, 2064. Of all the wonders of the ancient world, none is more mysterious than the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, located in what is now Iraq. But thousands of years ago, the Greeks called it Mesopotamia, and it's also the country where many of the great stories from the Bible took place, even though there were some that were set in Egypt. The Hanging Gardens themselves have a bit of a complicated history, well, to those who don't study them, but I do know that they were created in 600 BC and were meant to be a gift for the queen who'd come from a foreign land, as the barren desert landscape had made her homesick. So in order to satisfy her, the king decided to create a man-made mountain that was lush and green. The names of both king and queen have escaped me. Interestingly, despite the name, the gardens were not actually located in Babylon itself, but rather somewhere further up north, This is what I meant when I said complicated. For centuries, archaeologists have attempted to search out the exact location and have been unsuccessful, making the gardens a real-life Atlantis. Unless that too was once real, but not anymore, as it could have been destroyed by Kaiju, but I digress. Anyway, no trace of them has been located, making some historians wonder whether or not they existed at all. Well, I've been to many of the areas where these lost wonders once stood, and as far as I know, all signs have pointed to monster attacks. Even the Colossus of Rhodes, as that incident was secretly documented, and you're probably wondering, did I brave Iraq? As a matter of fact, I did. And not only that, I don't mean to brag or say that I know better, but I believe that I have discovered where the Hanging Gardens of Babylon used to be. However, not much is left of that place, as it seems to have gone back to being a barren wasteland of desert once again. Oh yes, there was the odd bit of ruin here and there, but most of it was empty, and you wouldn't believe that a palace full of gardens once stood here. As usual, the books, documentaries and archaeologists will tell you that it was all an earthquake. However, after finding out the real causes, I'm no longer convinced. The Mesopotamians were quite religious, like many other cultures, but their deities were real. They believed in a race of kaiju-sized beings called the Anunnaki, and there was one particular entity who had the face of an eagle and possessed wings. This to me sounds like another monster who seems to be eagle-like in appearance, only he looked more reptilian rather than avian and had cybernetic parts scattered throughout his body. The Babylonians would describe the Anunnaki as a race of giants from another planet. And whatever Kaiju was in Babylon 2,000 years ago clearly was not of this world. I need to tell you all something else that I remember reading up on. Back in late 2012, precisely the 21st of December, yes, the same day many people said that the Mayan apocalypse would occur, as that was a prophecy, a pair of shepherds were guiding their herd of goats up some rocky hills, and one of them noticed something unusual within the inside of a cave. Out of curiosity, the other shepherd went to investigate, and what he saw inside frightened him, as he claimed that a large skull of a strange bird-like creature was staring back at him. In fact, some even say that he was so scared by what he saw that he began praying for mercy for all of his sins. The shepherds made their report to the authorities, and they organized a team of paleontologists to the location where the shepherds made their shocking discovery. The body had long since gone and was never tracked down. However, the skull remained intact, and despite its condition, it seemed to be identifiable, and the scientists said that it resembled a pterodactyl, but it had 3 crests and not a single like the real pteranodon. The mysterious fossil was over 2,000 years old, with cracks all over it, and what used to be its forehead had a large hole within it. These weren't caused by deterioration throughout the centuries, but looked as if they were made while the creature was still alive, as if it were beaten up. This monster was clearly the victim of a violent death. The scientists had no clue of what it was, and decided to cover it up, but me being a kaijuologist recognized the bones as being the remains of a Rodan. It was determined that this individual was slain approximately round about the same time that the Hanging Gardens were destroyed, but not by the Babylonians. However, there is something that I would like to point out. In 1956, a pair of Rodan were awakened, but after they both died in a volcanic eruption, their sole surviving child grew up, and a few years later would become an ally to Godzilla when King Ghidorah attacked in 1964. Well, that was through the encouragement of Mothra. Anyway, that was a larger member of the species, where the creature that was discovered in the caves was a smaller type, and although deadly, it would have been unlikely that it would have been able to wipe out those Hanging Gardens, which could only mean one thing. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were exterminated by not just one kaiju but 2. I reckon that in the year 226 BC, the Hanging Gardens were under attack by Rodan, but he wasn't alone because at the same time, another monster showed up. However, this one would have been from outer space. For the Babylonians, this was one of the Anunnaki, but in reality, it was the alien cyborg Gigan. However, neither kaiju would have been protectors. Rodan was an animal, and Gigan an invader. The 2 kaiju would have fought out of instinct, and the Hanging Gardens would have been their battlefield. Rodan fought well, But if he were the larger species, then maybe he would have stood a chance. But alas, it was not meant to be, as he was eventually slaughtered by Gigan. And once he was dead, Gigan would have roared in victory and carried on his rampage, until the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which were a gift for the Queen and a place of beauty, were no more. The alien cyborg would have eventually moved on afterwards, leaving behind not only no trace of those mysterious gardens, but the slain corpse of Rodan. The Babylonians would have seen the pterodactyl kaiju as a creature who attempted to fight off Gigan, or Anunnaki as they called him, and in respect, they would have taken his head to the caves, where it remained undisturbed for over 2,000 years, until eventually discovered by two curious shepherds on the 21st of December 2012 AD. Mesopotamia may have been the birthplace of the Bible, but I can guarantee you that after that fateful night, where two colossal reptiles battled for dominance and fought each other to the death, no one was singing the Lord's song in the Holy Land. Entry number 5. Temple of Artemis, December 19th, 2064. Despite it being one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis is one structure that I never really paid much attention to, mainly because, although it would have been a wonder to behold, like the others, to me it was just your generic Greek building that was constructed centuries before the time of Christ, and then met an unfortunate demise centuries afterwards. However, Artemis, the building, not the person, well, to be more accurate, goddess, was actually burned down and destroyed a fair few times, until it finally met its demise to the point where it couldn't be built anymore. Well, may I remind you that we all live in a world full of monsters, so it will seem fitting that the Temple of Artemis was also the victim of a Kaiju attack in the far distant past. Here's a brief recap. The Pharaoh's lighthouse was destroyed by Manda, the Mausoleum of Hyrcanus was destroyed by Baragon, the Colossus of Rhodes was destroyed by Varan, and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were destroyed by not only Rodan, but Gigan too. But what about the statue of Zeus at Olympia, you're probably asking? Well, that's a topic for next time, but for now, the temple itself, and which Kaiju was responsible for its eventual destruction. I used to have a lot of respect in the History Channel, until they started to brainwash people with documentaries like Nostradamus' 2012 Lost Book of Doomsday and Ancient Aliens. Well, aliens I would laugh at, except we really have been visited by them more than once, and not to mention we've had Kaiju from outer space. I visited Ephesus last year looking for anything on the ancient structure that would be out of place, and although the temple itself was burned down and rebuilt several times like I said earlier, you would have thought that it too would have made it to the present day, but it also met its own demise, however not by invading armies, like they'll tell you at school. The ruins of the building looked as if they were hit by something large and round, as if they were caused by canospheres that were 100 meters. That sure doesn't sound right at all, does it? If the building was struck by canospheres that were 100 meters, then there'd be nothing left of the structure at all, would there? The Temple of Artemis was the victim of an invader, but not from the Persians, as the history books will tell you, and after being to Turkey and back, I had a feeling that the temple succumbed to another Kaiju attack, and while in the area I noticed that the ground had strange looking formations that looked like craters. The soil had long since grown around them. However, I do have very good eyesight, and you would be forgiven into thinking that they were caused by explosions from canospheres, but they seemed to be too large for such weaponry, and they also appeared to be in an alignment. Not only those craters, there was also some strange looking holes where you could fit an elephant's foot into. Now to my knowledge there is no man-made weapon that is 100 meters that is capable of making craters that leave holes like that. Also the building looks as if it was savagely ripped to pieces, so it would appear that a Kaiju is here in the far distant past. But which one? Well, there is a monster who is 100 meters and is capable of curling himself into a sphere shape. He will leave craters behind, and like Baragon, he too can also burrow underground. One member of the species was sighted in 1955, where he was in combat with Godzilla in Osaka, and the scientists described him as a creature known as an Anguirus. which is a combination between an ankylosaurus and a dragon. He doesn't breathe fire like an actual dragon, but from what I've read up, he is well known for screaming out sonic waves that can actually shatter buildings. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's how the temple met its end. The ancient structure was made out of stone after all, and if a Japanese pagoda was easily shattered by Anguirus' sonic waves back in 1955, then a temple from thousands of years ago would have stood no chance. The temple was often attacked and destroyed many times, and the goddess Artemis herself never came to save it, either because she was busy making sure that historical figures would arrive into the world safely, or she had many other temples dedicated to her that it didn't matter if she lost one. But what does matter is that the culprit for the eventual destruction of the Temple of Artemis was the fierce spiky dragon-like kaiju Anguirus. Entry number 6. Statue of Zeus at Olympia, December 20th, 2064. And now we have come to the final entry of this journal, and what I have discovered, all the evidence seems to point to kaiju attacks from millennia ago, and everyone appears to be oblivious to it all, even the professional archaeologists. But to be fair, not every disaster that has occurred throughout history has been due to giant monster invasions. For example, in 79 AD, the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were wiped off the face of the earth by the volcano Mount Vesuvius. So no kaiju were present then, and if they were, I being a kaijuologist would have spotted proof of it. And yes, I did go there, in case you're wondering, back in 2051, about 4 years ago. While writing up my theories on what happened to the 6 wonders that didn't make it to the present, I have been debating whether or not to show my following colleagues on my discoveries or keep it all to myself when I return home, as I only have a couple more days in Cairo before heading to the airport. The weather is usually hot at this time of year in Egypt, despite it being December, but the heavens seem to have opened up today. Must be the wet season or something. Anyway, my final destination was the birthplace of the legendary Olympic Games, Olympia, which was home to another lost wonder. However, this one was the great statue of the king of the gods, Zeus, the god of thunder, who was said to control lightning. Now, the statue was built of bronze and ivory in 435 BC and met his demise by fire in 425 AD. Oh yes, there was fire that brought the demise of the great statue, but after all my research, I highly doubt that it was caused by the Romans, or even the Catholics, as they'll tell you in the history books, and I know because I was in Olympia last year. The area itself, from what I was told, was once closed off because those who visited the location back in the 17th century had a strange sickness and they never made it to recovery. No one knew why that was, and it wasn't until the 1980s when the ancient city finally became safe and the popular tourist destination that it is today. Autopsies were provided on those who perished in the 1600s during the 90s, and it turns out that those people died of radiation poisoning. So between the 5th and 20th century AD, Olympia was the most radioactive city in all of Greece, just like Chernobyl in Germany. However, there were no nuclear power plants in ancient times, and yet Olympia was a nuclear waste for a millennium. And while yes, the great statue of Zeus was obliterated by fire, the fire itself wasn't caused by the Romans, but by atomic breath. It was only a matter of time until I eventually got to him. The real king of the gods could easily defend himself with his lightning bolts, but unfortunately the statue was unable to retaliate back against the king of the monsters. Of all the natural disasters that have occurred throughout the eons, he is Mother Nature's agent, and is a true force to be reckoned with. Despite being cited throughout history, he has always made his presence known to the human race, and one of his first contacts with human civilization was in 425 AD, 5 centuries after the time of Christ. He would have arisen out of the Mediterranean Sea and made his journey across the Greek countryside. His destination, Olympia, but not to watch any Olympic Games. He approached the ancient metropolis and unleashed his wrath amongst the defenseless citizens. The Greeks may have had a military force, but they didn't have army tanks back then, so they could only rely on catapults, which would have been useless against the great behemoth. He stomped towards the temple, where the statue of Zeus was located. His dorsal spines would have glowed, and before anybody knew it, he blasted his atomic breath, which would have incinerated both temple and statue to oblivion, then roared in triumph, to which afterwards he returned to the Mediterranean and was never seen again until about 1,000 years later on the other side of the world, when reawakened by the atomic blasts in 1948, but made his presence known in 1954 outside of Tokyo off the coast of Japan, and the rest, so they say, is history. After doing all my research, and because we share the world with Titans, I'm convinced 100% that the 6 wonders of the ancient world were the victims of Kaiju attacks. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if those old sailors' drawings of sea serpents attacking ships were records of encounters with Kaiju themselves. And if that's the case, then why did our ancient ancestors document what they saw, with the exception of one who secretly wrote down the Rhodes incident? It's because the human race was sensitive back then, so afraid of the unknown that it took man centuries until he finally plucked up courage to explore the world. And no wonder, especially with all these kaiju attacks occurring now and then throughout history. They were so terrified by what they saw that they just wanted to forget witnessing these great beasts and say that it was all earthquakes, fires and invaded armies, and that destroyed the 6 great wonders, leaving only the Pyramid at Giza, despite coming up with all these legends of dragons and other various mythical monsters. So the history books will tell you that the lighthouse of Alexandria was destroyed by an earthquake in 1356 AD, but in reality it was Manda who brought it down. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus met its end in the 15th century AD due to constant earthquakes caused by not the earth but by Baragon, but Colossus fell to his knees when Pharaoh attacked both city and island of Rhodes. In 200 BC, the Hannan Guards of Babylon were the battlefield for Rodan and Gigan. In 226 BC, Anguirus was the destroyer of the Temple of Artemis in the 3rd century AD, and the great statue of Zeus at Olympia was incinerated by Godzilla in 425 AD. It has been an astonishing journey finding out all this unknown knowledge, and despite now and then hearing reports of giant monster attacks in cities around the world, I'm still amazed that this has never occurred to anybody, that the 6 lost wonders met the same fate. I think I should get this new discovery out into the world. I'll be meeting up with some of my colleagues next Friday, and perhaps I'll discuss it with them. I'm in Cairo at present, and it's supposed to be hot today, but yet it's raining very hard, I might add. Good lord, it's terrible. And it's not even the monsoon season and... Hold on. What's up with the lightning? They look like beams. And a building's just been blown up. What's that strange noise? It seems to be coming from the sky. I don't like the look of that black shape. And is it me, or does it resemble a dragon with 3 heads? I gotta take shelter before it's too... Entry number 7. Epilogue. January the 27th, 2065. It's been a while, but I've finally come round. So here's a bit of an update for you all. I was caught up during the destruction when the hotel where I was doing my research was destroyed. I headed for the closet to take cover, but unfortunately I never made it in time, and I was found amongst the ruins of the building. I'm not going to lie, but I'm still surprised that I survived. I should be dead after being involved in all that chaos. I remember feeling the building collapse around me, and before I passed out, I don't honestly know what happened next. However, I thought that I saw something, and it looked like a large charcoal black dinosaur towering over everything in sight, and it seemed to be headed towards the source of what destroyed the hotel. I had to spend Christmas in the hospital. However, I got a lot of support from my colleagues and loved ones. I looked up on what happened in Cairo on the 20th December. Thousands of years ago, our ancient ancestors didn't have cameras, so they could only say that it was all earthquakes. But here in the 21st century AD, we have the technology to record what actually happened, and the news says that there was no hurricane that hit Cairo that day, and there were drones that captured the whole incident. Before I passed out, I said that I thought that I saw a giant charcoal black dinosaur, and there was a big lizard that day. You see, as soon as my hotel was demolished, the king of the monsters erupted from the River Nile, and he headed for the entity that destroyed the hotel. Godzilla and the giant beast first fought in the city, and soon the Giza Plateau became a battlefield for the two Alpha Titans. And I'm sorry to say that the Great Pyramid was destroyed during the chaos, and even the Guardian of the Plateau, the Great Sphinx, also met its end when Godzilla blasted his atomic breath at the Golden Dragon after being knocked over. He defeated the enemy and left the city afterwards, not bothering to cause any more mayhem. However, there was a price to pay, as not only the plateau, but the whole world lost the Great Pyramid. The sole survivor of the 7 ancient wonders is now no more, lost forever. It stood for thousands of years, but now the Great Pyramid of Giza has now joined the 6 wonders of the ancient world, so it looks like the list will have to be updated. I know that throughout these entries, I haven't listed the destructions of the wonders in chronological order, as I've only done them in the order of times I visited those locations where they once stood, but this time I'll be listing them in the correct chronological order. So first to go was the Colossus of Rhodes, when attacked by Var the Unbelievable in 228 BC, the Hanigans of Babylon were the location where Rodan and Gigan battled each other to the death in 226 BC, Anguirus was the cause of the demise of the Temple of Artemis in the 3rd century AD, Godzilla incinerated the statue of Zeus in 424 AD, Alexandria lost its lighthouse when Manda attacked in 1356 AD, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus was a buffet to Baragon in the 15th century AD, and now in 2064 AD, the Great Pyramid of Giza was obliterated by the one who is many, the three-headed devil from outer space, King Ghidorah. This is the Temple of Abu Simbel, built by King Ramesses the Great in 1264 BCE. Oh God. Oh my God. It's happening again. Wonders vs Kaiju was last year's big project. It pretty much started off as a drawing of the character Amanda attacking the Pharaoh's lighthouse in Alexandria, and from there a story started to spark, and I decided to draw more pictures of the other 5 wonders be destroyed by Kaiju, and soon a brand new series would be on the horizon. Despite being a fan of movie monsters, prehistoric animals, and mythical creatures, I have also had a fascination with ancient cultures as well, especially the Seven Wonders. In fact, I always found it fascinating that these monuments didn't make it to the present, with the exception of the Great Pyramid of Giza, to which I actually did visit many years ago, all the way back in mid-2005, and a few years ago, I was in Rhodes itself in late 2018. But the other locations I haven't been to in real life, only the character Harrison Jones, who I made up. And yes, he is meant to be a reference to Indiana Jones and the actor who played the character, Harrison Ford. The series was actually meant to be set in the present, but while drawing what was supposed to be the final image of the show, which was of Godzilla incinerating the statue of Zeus, I thought why not set it in the future. As Harrison Jones finishes off his journal, Cairo is under attack by King Ghidorah, and both him and Godzilla have their battle on the Giza Plateau, where the Great Pyramid and Sphinx both get destroyed. For the incarnation of Godzilla that I wanted to use for the series, it was surprisingly, believe it or not, actually not so easy to decide on which version of the Kaiju I had in mind. It was originally going to be the 68 to 72 model, to which you all saw in the teaser, well, the Mezco figure of him at least. I'll get back onto that one later. Till I dropped him, and for a while, it looked like Shodai Goji was going to take the spotlight. But in the end I decided that the 64 incarnation, better known as Musa Goji, would be more ideal, and thus I had pictured him in mind, despite that Gojira himself now and then appeared in some of those pictures, but they were just to demonstrate certain angles. And for the record, it was Musa Goji who rampaged Olympia. I know that some of you may have been disappointed that Mothra wasn't included into the series, and that's simply because I didn't know where to put her. I could have had her fly into Olympia in an attempt to protect the statue of Zeus from the King of the Monsters, but I felt that if she saved the statue, and maybe the other wonders from the other Kaiju attacks, as she is after all a protector, and not a destroyer, unless her twin fairies have been taken hostage, and also if she'd been there, then all those ancient destructions would have been prevented. I placed Godzilla in the finale because not only was I saving him till last, but I thought that him destroying the statue of Zeus would be a reference/homage to the IDW comic book series, Godzilla Rampage Across Time, Issue 2, where, spoilers to all those who haven't read it yet, Godzilla attacks Mount Olympus and exterminates all the gods, except for Zeus. Dangerville did a video on that chapter, links in the description below. I chose to upload the final entry on the 3rd November, because not only is it Godzilla Day, if you're a kaiju enthusiast like myself, but it was also the release date for Godzilla -1 over in Japan, before other countries got their releases. I did a thoughts and opinions video on the at the time upcoming movie when the teaser was launched. Links to that video is in the description below, if you wish to check it out. As for the other wonders and their respective monsters, well, for the most part it was easy picks, but I had different ideas for 2 entries. For example, the Hanan gods of Babylon were meant to be attacked by Rodan only, and there was also going to be a completely different plot altogether as well. Originally he was going to start off as a mysterious egg that was discovered in the mountains, to which it would have been removed and then taken to the palace, where it would eventually hatch. But this would soon, however, turn out to be a massive mistake, because eventually the mother Rodan would return to seek out her egg, to which during the rampage she would eventually find her offspring and would have destroyed the palace and also the surroundings as revenge to all those peasants who had foolishly taken her yet-to-hatch child. And this would of course lead to the destruction of the Hanan Gardens of Babylon. I rejected/scrapped this idea because I felt that it sounded rather weak when compared to the other entries, so I rewrote the story. After drawing Rodan destroying the gardens, I thought that the 4th entry should actually stand out from the other entries, so I decided to include another kaiju, and there was no challenge, as I knew who I wanted to use. And that's how Gigan entered the series. I just couldn't resist throwing in my favourite character into the show, and thus the Tamashii Nation's SH Monsterons figure of him had only just been announced at the time that the script was written, so this was pretty much my way of celebrating. However, I had unfortunately forgotten about the Israelites weeping by the rivers of Babylon when they remembered Sion. Had I remembered that line, then I would have quoted, "The Babylons may have captured the Israelites, but after the Hanan Gardens incident, with Rodan and Gigan battling to the death, the Babylons were the ones who wept by their rivers." It also took a while for me to think on who should wipe out the mausoleum at Halicarnassus as well. It was between Baragon and Gorosaurus, but since the mausoleum in reality was destroyed by constant earthquakes, I felt that it would make sense and be suitable if the subterranean dinosaur Baragon was responsible. However, originally it was actually meant to be the GMK Baragon, as you can see in this early drawing, but I changed my mind and went for the Showa incarnation instead because I felt that version of the character was a lot more destructive when GMK's was a Guardian. In fact, many of the monsters that I chose to be in the series were of Showa variety, with the exception of Rodan, as I used the Heisei model, but the Showa design did at one point get a shout out, and thus I may have said this in the past before, but I'll say it again here. I am a massive fan of the Showa period, as well as the Heisei, Millennium, Monsterverse and Reiwa series. Despite the show being all audio, it was actually meant to have some scenes of animation, to which I would use some of the larger figures, but these would have been used for close-ups only. However, I scrapped this idea because I felt that it wouldn't really be necessary, and thus I think audio accompanied by pictures was a bad choice. If I had the space, equipment and talent, then I would build models of the 7 Wonders, and have my Kaiju figures from Bandai and NECA come in and destroy them, but I'm unfortunately not that gifted. However, if anybody would like to adapt the series into an animation themselves, whether it's through figures or computer-generated models, then by all means go ahead. All I ask is that if I receive some credit. I'm not the first person to come up with the idea of Kaiju destroying the 6 Wonders, as this small kid depicts Godzilla attacking the Pharaoh's Lighthouse. So other folks have had this idea before, and I had fun bringing the concept to life. And because I do like Kaiju castings, here's the cast of Wonders vs Kaiju. Notice I used the Final Wars Rodan in Fire Rodan's place. Well, that's because there's no decent looking high-grade / Gashapon figure for Heisei Rodan, well, at least at the time of making this video. My favourite entries have got to be entries 3, 4 and 6, because not only do they feature my top favourite Kaiju, even though Manda, Baragon and Anguirus are also top dogs as well, but the wonders such as the Colossus of Rhodes, Hidden Gardens of Babylon and Statue of Zeus I find the most interesting. I've provided links to some videos by See You in History to those who wish to know the real history of the 7 Wonders, as well as some links to the Kaiju profiles on each monster who appeared in the series. It's a real shame that the ancients didn't build enough structures that could also be considered wonders, because there were so many monsters that I wanted to feature in the show. However, those who did make an appearance, or got a shout out, you could say had cameos, but at least I chose the favourites, which is more important. Before landing on Varan, 2 other Kaiju also considered to be the destroyers for the Colossus of Rhodes, those being Titanosaurus and the Maguma. However, both were rejected because 1, Titanosaurus wasn't a destructive monster in the beginning of his debut movie, 1975's Terror of Mechagodzilla, but rather a victim forced to do terrible things against his will. And as for Maguma, well, he was more of an animal who wanted humans out of his territory / environment so that he can have his peace and quiet. And thus, with all that blubber, I think that he would have been uncomfortable and would have suffocated in the warm Mediterranean Sea, and Varan was the perfect choice. I hope that you all enjoyed the series as much as I enjoyed making it. And which of these Lost Wonders do you think is the most fascinating? I've long been interested in both the Colossus of Rhodes and Hidden Gardens of Babylon, and I think Varan, Rodan and Gigan were excellent choices, as they too are top favourites to me, as I said earlier. But let's have a discussion in the comments below. This is Dragonzilla 1991 signing out. Take care, hope you're all having a happy Christmas, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now, Merry Christmas.